What if I told you Coca-Cola lost a war? Not to Pepsi, not in America, but in the heart of the Andes, where a golden soda named Inca Kola beat the world's biggest brand at its own game. Spies, boycotts, immigrant betrayal, even World War II played a role. This isn't just about soda. It's about identity, resistance, and the drink that dared to defy an empire. Crack open Latin America's boldest secrets. Fact-checked, footnoted, and irresistible. I'm Arturo, and this is Latin Laura. From Latin America's history to mysteries and true crime, to local legends, whispering Latin intrigue. Hit subscribe. Fresh revelations drop every week, ready for your next campfire debate. They say Coca-Cola conquered the world. It marched with soldiers. It danced with presidents. It poured across borders with the quiet force of empire, red, fizzing, and inevitable. But there's one place where Coca-Cola didn't win, a place where the ice buckets whisper a different name, where children's birthdays are golden, where the bubblegum sweet fizz of resistance still lingers on the tongue. Peru, because in Peru, Inca Kola reigns, not by accident, not by charity, but by conquest. This is the story of how the world's most powerful soft drink was outmaneuvered, not by sugar or bubbles, but by memory, migration, and myth. It's a story of war and loyalty, of boycotts and bodegas, of an immigrant's dream that fermented into a nation's pride. It's the story of how a yellow soda, made with herbs and heart, stared down Coca-Cola and refused to blink. And it all began with a man who crossed an ocean. Joseph Robinson Lindley didn't arrive with gold. He arrived because his town no longer had any. He left Doncaster, England, a coal town whose air choked of soot and labor, and in 1910 stepped into the salt-thick wind of Peru. It wasn't his country. It wasn't even his language. But he saw something most men missed: thirst. Lima was modernizing. The streets bustled with vendors, politics, and dust. The upper classes sipped imported lemonades. The working classes drank chicha and fruit water, often homemade, often inconsistent. There was room, Lindley thought, for something else, something bottled, something clean, something new. He opened a factory, small, metallic, and humble, and named it the Santa Rosa Bottling Company after the Peruvian saint. It was more than branding. It was an offering, a way of saying, I'm here to stay. He began with basics: lemon squash, orange fizz, soft drinks made from imported English syrup. His machines sputtered. His rivals, mostly local, laughed. But Lindley worked like a man trying to bottle purpose itself. When ingredients were scarce, he improvised. When competitors got dirty, he kept his sleeves clean. By the 1930s, the business was stable, profitable, respected. But Lindley didn't come to Peru just to sell soda. He came to invent one, and not just any soda, a soda that belonged. He wanted it to taste like the land itself, to smell like Peruvian kitchens, to carry the color of legends, gold. So he began to mix. Lindley worked late into the nights, experimenting like an alchemist. Herbs from the highlands, spices from the coast, roots, fruits, florals, notes of chamomile and citrus, soft whispers of vanilla. Eventually he found it, a 13-ingredient blend anchored by Hierba Luisa, lemon verbena, that tasted like nothing else on earth. The flavor, unclassifiable. Locals would later say it tasted like bubble gum. Others claimed it reminded them of sweet tea. Children just said it tasted like Peru. He bottled it, labeled it with Incan motifs, geometric, sacred. Colored it golden, not just for the Incas, but for the sun, for the Andes, for memory. He named it Inca Kola, and as fate would have it, the city of Lima was about to celebrate its 400th anniversary. Lindley launched his creation into the heart of the festival. Billboards read, "There is only one, and it's like no other." People drank out of curiosity, then again out of wonder, then again because they didn't want anything else. By 1936, Inca Kola had a foothold. Bottles glowed behind bodega windows. Waiters served it with lomo saltado. Grandmothers poured it beside rice and stews. But just 1 year later, something else arrived. Something darker, richer, louder, Coca-Cola. And it wasn't here to share shelf space. The Red Shadow Coca-Cola landed in Peru in 1936, not with a whisper, but with the confidence of an empire. It had taken New York, Paris, Buenos Aires. Now it wanted Lima. Its arrival was swift, clinical, like a military operation dressed as a beverage rollout. New bottling plants, ad campaigns that glowed like neon, billboards in flawless Spanish, trucks painted with that deep imperial red, radio jingles imported straight from Atlanta and adapted with a Peruvian smile. But Coca-Cola didn't come alone. It came backed by American capital, political muscle, and decades of momentum. It didn't just want market share, it wanted dominion. To most local brands, that meant extinction, but not to Lindley. He didn't flinch, didn't pivot, didn't apologize for his yellow drink that smelled like herbs instead of caramel. He looked Coca-Cola in the eye and doubled down. He knew Coca-Cola had size, but he had something rarer, affection. He launched a counteroffensive. Trucks bearing the Inca Kola logo rolled through the barrios of Lima, painted in red and white, Peru's national colors. Radios played new jingles, not about freshness or fun, but about home. One commercial simply ended with the phrase, El sabor que nos une, the flavor that unites us. In a country as diverse as Peru, indigenous, mestizo, Afro-Peruvian, Chinese, Japanese, that message struck deep. Coca-Cola was from the outside, Inca Kola was from you. And in the tiendas and puestos, the little shops where life happened, this wasn't a marketing war. It was a matter of daily habit. You came in for rice, cooking oil, a newspaper, and you grabbed a bottle from the fridge. The fridge always had both, the red label and the yellow one. But slowly, quietly, the yellow began to move faster. Children liked the sweetness. Adults liked the pride. Even people who preferred Coke couldn't help but smile at the idea that a local soda was giving the giant a run for its money. Inca Kola wasn't just competing, it was winning. By 1939, just 3 years after Coke's arrival, Inca Kola was outselling it. Word spread. A family-owned company had created a drink so tied to national identity that even the mighty Coca-Cola couldn't dethrone it. Still, this wasn't a fairy tale. Not yet. Because far beyond the Andes, something was brewing. Louder, deadlier, and harder to stop than any soda war. A world war was coming, and what happened next would change the future of Inca Kola forever. The Lindleys had threaded their golden soda into the rhythms of Peruvian life, and Peruvians, rich or poor, city or mountain, bodega or banquet, were drinking it. But World War II was no ordinary storm. It blew sideways, it scattered loyalties, it dug up old fears and handed them to governments as policy. And in Peru, it put a very specific community in the crosshairs, Japanese-Peruvians. They had come decades earlier, first as laborers, then as small merchants. They opened bodegas, ran laundries, sold fruit from corner stalls. They were quiet, industrious, and increasingly successful. Too successful, some said. By the 1930s, anti-Japanese sentiment simmered in political speeches and tabloid ink. The accusation that Japanese shop owners were forming a monopoly, that they were spies, that they were loyal to Tokyo, not Lima. And then came 1941, Pearl Harbor, the Pacific explodes, Japan officially at war with the United States. The Allies scramble, Latin America follows the lead, Peru severs ties with Japan. Nationalist papers scream about the yellow threat. Government agents sweep through Japanese neighborhoods like wind through dry leaves, closing schools, freezing accounts, shuttering shops. Some families vanish overnight, deported to internment camps in the U.S. No trial, no warning, no return ticket. Hundreds of bodegas, quiet little grocery stores run by Japanese Peruvians, were suddenly labeled suspicious. The country that once tolerated them now turned cold. And just when the community needed normalcy, something to hold on to, Coca-Cola pulled out. Whether out of caution, politics, or corporate calculation, Coke cut off all deliveries to Japanese-owned stores. No more crates, no more invoices, no more red bottles in the fridges of bodegas that had sold them faithfully for years. It was a boycott dressed as business. And into that silence, Isaac Lindley stepped forward. He didn't send a memo. He didn't hold a press conference. What he did was simpler and braver. He loaded his truck, not a delivery truck, his truck. The man who would inherit the company climbed behind the wheel, crates of Inca Kola in the back, and drove. From bodega to bodega, through fear-struck neighborhoods where shutters stayed closed and police passed slow, Isaac stopped. He knocked. He called the owners by name, and he unloaded soda. "We'll keep supplying you," he said. "Pay us later, or don't. We're not going anywhere." Sometimes he left entire crates for free. Sometimes he waited in silence as a shopkeeper cried. To the Lindleys, this was loyalty. Business, yes, but also something older, heavier. The Japanese-Peruvian community had built Inca Kola's early distribution network. They had taken a risk on a golden soda when nobody knew its name. And now, when everyone else had vanished, the Lindleys showed up in yellow trucks with yellow bottles in the middle of the war. Word spread. Inca Kola didn't abandon us. The phrase echoed in whispers, in back rooms, in family dinners where nothing else was safe to say. And slowly, quietly, the fridges filled again. Not with Coca-Cola, but with the drink that had stayed. The golden flavor became something more. It was safety, familiarity, a sweet, fizzy defiance. For a persecuted community, every bottle was a reminder, you still belong. By war's end, the Japanese-Peruvian community had lost homes, shops, and savings. But they hadn't lost Inca Kola. And Inca Kola, it had gained something Coca-Cola could never buy, loyalty that tasted like survival. When the world stepped out of the ashes of war, Coca-Cola stepped back into Peru. It returned the way corporations always do, quietly, confidently, like it had never left. New trucks, new distributors, new optimism. But something had changed. The red bottles still sparkled under fluorescent lights, but in hundreds of bodegas, the front shelf was already full. With yellow, Inca Kola didn't just survive the war, it thrived in the absence of its biggest rival. And more importantly, it earned something Coke never could, memory. Because you don't forget the drink that stood by you when the banks didn't. You don't forget the crate that arrived when your shutters were cracked and your name was whispered with suspicion. The Japanese-Peruvian community kept selling Inca Kola, not just out of gratitude, but because by now, the whole country had made the switch. Coca-Cola tried to catch up. They invested. They advertised. They sponsored events. They launched slogans that sounded good in Atlanta but landed cold in Callao. And every time they tried to reclaim the throne, Inca Kola stayed one step ahead. Because by now, it wasn't just about flavor. It was about belonging. The golden drink sat at lunch counters, next to ceviche and rice. It bubbled beside chifa, the Chinese-Peruvian fusion born of immigrant kitchens and stubborn ingenuity. It was poured at birthdays, wakes, weddings, protests. It was Peru in a bottle. The taste, sweet, herbal, floral, strange, was a national fingerprint. Coke had its fizz, its caramel, its bite, but Inca Kola had something Coca-Cola couldn't replicate in a lab: affection. By the 1950s, Inca Kola was the top-selling soft drink in Peru. By the 1970s, it was a fixture in every district, from the gleaming neighborhoods of Miraflores to the dusty outskirts of Ayacucho. By the 1980s, Coca-Cola had been outplayed for nearly 5 decades. It wasn't just a rivalry, it was a loss. By the time the world reached the fluorescent rush of the 1980s, Inca Kola wasn't just popular, it was untouchable. In restaurants, it was poured like ritual. In homes, it came chilled from fridges packed for birthdays, communions, or just a hot Wednesday. Inca Kola had threaded itself into the rhythm of life, not because it was advertised, but because it was remembered. Other sodas came and went, some darker, some cheaper, some trendier. But none could dethrone the golden bottle with the flavor that still defied classification. Bubblegum, tea, vanilla grass. It didn't matter. It tasted like here. Every empire has its golden age. This was Inca Kola's. The Lindley family didn't rest. They pushed deeper into the jungle, up into the Andes, out to the poorest districts and the wealthiest suburbs. They didn't sell soda, they sold identity. The ads didn't brag, they didn't shout, they smiled. El sabor del Peru, the taste of Peru. In a time when nationalism was heavy and politics were unstable, that slogan didn't just sell drinks, it anchored people. To buy Inca Kola was to say, we know who we are. Even the food bent around it. As Peruvian cuisine exploded in pride and creativity, Inca Kola was at every table, sweet to counter spice, bright to chase fat, ubiquitous not by demand, but by love. You could eat a Chinese-Peruvian arroz chaufa, dip your anticuchos in aji, sip your bright yellow soda, and no, this wasn't fusion, it was home. Coca-Cola kept trying. They launched new slogans, adjusted the fizz, cut the price. They even introduced offshoots. Sprite, Fanta, whatever might catch a young crowd. But it didn't matter. In Peru, Coke wasn't Coke. It was the other soda. In marketing departments across Latin America, Peru became a case study, a problem, a strange anomaly where the global strategy didn't work. Executives flew in. Data was collected. Money was spent, but nothing cracked it. Because Coca-Cola could never buy what Inca Kola already was. A drink, a memory, a mirror. Empires don't fall overnight. They crack. Quietly, from the inside. By the early 1990s, Inca Kola was still king, but the world around it was changing, and fast. Peru opened its markets. Foreign money poured in. Fast food chains planted flags across the Andes. Globalization wasn't knocking, it was barging in. And Coca-Cola? It had been watching, patient, calculating. The red giant had bled for decades in Peru, but it hadn't left. It had learned. Inca Kola, for all its love, was bleeding too. Behind the scenes, the Lindley family was fighting a costly war. Every billboard, every delivery route to a mountain village, every festival sponsorship, it added up. Profits thinned, loans mounted, and the effort to hold back Coca-Cola wasn't getting cheaper. Worse, Coke wasn't playing fair. It started offering volume discounts, undercutting prices in key markets. Some stores flipped, others hesitated. Still others held out, loyal to the golden fizz. But it was working. And then came McDonald's. In 1995, the Golden Arches opened in Lima. For most of the world, that meant Coca-Cola. The two brands were married globally. Contracts, exclusivity, handshake deals older than most of the staff. But in Peru, McDonald's executives hesitated. They knew something Coca-Cola didn't want to admit. If you open a McDonald's here and don't serve Inca Kola, people might walk out. So the unthinkable happened. McDonald's broke its Coca-Cola only policy. It added Inca Kola to the menu, side by side, fries, burger, yellow soda. To the public, it looked like a win, a cultural victory. The flag still stood, but inside the Lindley offices, the cost of staying on top was piling up. The trucks, the promotions, the battles over shelf space. It was a beautiful war, but it was bleeding them dry. Something had to give. And Coca-Cola? It smelled blood in the syrup. In 1999, the country woke to a headline that hit like a body blow. Inca Kola had sold to Coca-Cola. Half the company, gone. 50% handed to the same empire it had resisted for over 6 decades. The soda that beat the giant had just joined it. For some Peruvians, it felt like sacrilege, like watching a war hero shake hands with the enemy. The newspapers ran with it. El día que Inca Kola se rindió, the day Inca Kola surrendered. In cafes and kitchens, people said what couldn't be said in boardrooms. They sold our pride, they sold our flavor. But it wasn't that simple. The Lindleys were cornered. The debts had stacked. The war had drained them. Every year was a fight. They knew they could lose everything or make a deal that kept Inca Kola alive, even if it meant giving up part of its soul. Coca-Cola came in with $200 million. They didn't touch the recipe, didn't rebrand the bottle. They didn't need to. They bought the global rights to Inca Kola and gained a dominant stake in its production. The Lindleys kept control within Peru. The drink would still be bottled locally, still be distributed by the same trucks, still taste the same. From the outside, nothing changed, but everyone knew. The golden drink was now backed by red. Still, something strange happened. Peruvians didn't turn away. They kept drinking it, kept buying it, kept calling it ours, because despite the deal, Inca Kola hadn't betrayed them. Not really. It had bent, not broken, and maybe, just maybe, that was its final act of survival. Today, if you walk the streets of Lima, you'll still see it. Inca Kola, cold and golden, humming in plastic cups next to ceviche, poured with ceremony in family kitchens, lined in glowing rows behind glass refrigerators across bodegas from Villa El Salvador to Huancayo. It didn't vanish. It didn't fade. It became something deeper, a ghost in the glass. Tourists taste it with curiosity. Bubblegum, banana cream soda, they laugh, shrug, sip again. But for Peruvians, the taste isn't strange. It's sacred. It's the flavor of birthdays, of borrowed joy, of that one corner store that stayed open late. It's the bottle your grandmother bought, the one your father opened with a pop, the one you handed to your son at his first palada. Inca Kola didn't survive because of strategy. It survived because of affection. It survived because it never tried to be anything but Peruvian. Even now, owned in part by the very giant it once defied, it remains untouched. Not because Coca-Cola loves it, but because it knows better. You can buy a company. You can't buy what it means. Business schools teach the story as a case study in branding. Economists point to patriotism and market segmentation. But they miss something. The war Inca Kola won wasn't just against Coca-Cola. It was against erasure, against the slow, steady drip of foreign dominance, against the belief that bigger is always better, that red always wins over gold. It was the taste that stood by a persecuted community during war, the taste that refused to be imported or explained, the taste that became a country's mirror. In a world conquered by colas, Inca Kola made Peru the exception. So next time you're in a market in Callao, or a family lunch in Trujillo, or a chifa in Surco, when the yellow fizz hits your glass and you hear the bubbles rise like a secret whispered home, remember, this isn't just soda. It's survival in a bottle. It's loyalty made sweet. It's the empire that glowed golden and never bowed. Gracias. Thanks for trekking the hidden trails of Latin America with me. I am Arturo, and this is Latin Laura. If tonight's story unsettled you, subscribe and ring the bell, because Latin America's darkest stories are far from over.